Hi there, and welcome to the Play Therapy Circle. Before we begin, please note this podcast is for informational and educational purposes only. It does not provide therapeutic advice, and listening does not create a client-therapist relationship. All views expressed are my own, and any case examples shared have been de-identified to protect privacy. If you're seeking personal support, please reach out to a qualified mental health professional in your area. Hi, and welcome to an episode of the Play Therapy Circle. I'm Kylie Ellison, a therapist, clinical supervisor, and play therapy trainer, and I'm so grateful you're here. This podcast is a space for thoughtful, soulful conversations about child-centered therapy, play-based work, and what it means to show up with presence and compassion, both for our clients and for ourselves. Whether you're a seasoned play therapist, a student just starting out, or someone deeply passionate about working with children, you belong here. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Play Therapy Circle podcast. I'm your host, Kylie Ellison, and I am so glad you are here. You guys, happy Tuesday. I am recording this on a Tuesday morning. For anyone who is watching this on YouTube, I look like I've just woken up because technically I kind of have. Well, actually, I took my daughter to sports aerobics first this morning, so I've actually achieved a few things before 9 a.m. Happy Tuesday, happy start of the week. How are you all doing? How are you doing? How are we almost into the middle of August? I know I say that all the time about where we're at. It is cold here in Brisbane. So in the Bayside area of Brisbane, in Queensland, in Australia, it is cold today. But by cold, I'm being dramatic. It's probably like 15 degrees Celsius. So work that out for your part of the world, but it's really not that cold. I'm just being dramatic. How is everyone going? I am definitely in a bit of a season at the moment, and I feel like recording this on the podcast means that at some point I'll probably come back to this and revisit this. But definitely in the season of trying to find a bit more of a balance in my life. I don't know if anyone else is on that journey. I haven't got the secret sauce yet though, so I'll keep you posted. But trying to kind of rein back some of the work commitments I have at the moment to get a bit more of a work-life balance. So the podcast is always a big priority for me. So podcast will continue as normal, but just paring back some of my other work so that, I can maintain all of the things, because it's a marathon, not a sprint, right? So feeling a little bit tired this week, so you probably can hear it. I'm feeling a little bit tired. But I am excited to do this next episode because we have started this, foundational episodes to really, again, build on the information we've provided, but to support you guys, obviously, in your practice as child-centered play therapists. So we have done tracking and reflecting feelings. Today is returning responsibility. In the coming weeks, I'm also going to do limit setting, making meaning statements, or empathetic responding, whichever way you like to call it, and esteem building statements. So we've still got a few more foundational skills as part of our child-centered play therapy core framework. So this is episode technically 3, but obviously we've got a lot of episodes before us. Episode 3 in our sequence here of skills. So I think that returning responsibility, when I think about it in terms of other roles that I have as a supervisor and a trainer, returning responsibility seems to be one of those ones as professionals that isn't too difficult to grasp, but I also want to give that grace and caveat to anyone who is struggling with returning responsibility. And we're going to dive into, I guess, the definition and some of those pitfalls, and obviously giving you guys some support around doing that. I know that one of the biggest barriers that I have encountered in teaching this work to others in the past has been, or I guess the potential weakness, I guess. No, weakness is the wrong word. I guess caveat to those who might struggle is that oftentimes we want to help children. We get into this profession because we want to support them, we want to see them thrive. And so sometimes returning responsibility and sitting in the uncomfortable, that's what we're kind of talking about here, right? Is returning responsibility to a child to allow them the space and opportunity to do it for themselves. It is a very different way of working to other modalities, to other professions where there may be an expectation that the adult steps in to assist. This is a very different framework, and so for any of you who have been in that alternative space of helping jump in and helping to fix, this offers an alternative that's really important to consider, because we know that children are very much developmentally action orientated. It's so important for them to experience those new learnings physically, through their whole bodies, through movement, through their experience of interacting with another. So if we are stepping in and fixing or talking at a cognitive level to a child, the learning isn't the same. So it's really important that we think about it, and can be a very transformative skill. So it's also something that I like to lean into as a play therapist in offering suggestions to parents and caregivers as well. So this could be something you definitely could suggest as part of your parent consultation updates. So let's talk a little bit about what is it in terms of a definition. So if I was to give you a definition of retaining responsibility, it's the skill of handing decisions, choices, and problem solving back to the child without withholding help, but doing it in a warm and supportive way. So it's our answer to the child's bid for us to do something for them. So to decide for them, to tell them what to do. We know that when children present in this way, it may be related potentially to an external locus of control that they're experiencing, where they feel like things are happening to them that they have no control over. And so there is a emphasis on them feeling like they need to defer responsibility to the adults, because that's how they've learned in their interactions with others. The other part of that is sometimes due to trauma. Children will potentially engage in this behavior as a way of actually keeping themselves safe. So I have had many examples of children, say in the domestic violence space, just for an example, where to keep themselves safe, it's been much more effective for them to be, say, people pleasers and to make sure that everyone else is okay, defer responsibility to others so that it keeps them safe. So it is certainly something for some of the children that we work with that has been a survival tool. So we want to provide a space, and you guys know from talking about the different stages in child-centered play therapy, we have that warm-up stage for a reason. And again, it's all child-led, so all children move through this. But that idea of them developing that sense of safety and trust first, so that when they get into this stage where they start showing us in the second stage more of those negative aspects of self, that we can then support them to establish those new ways of being and interacting with adults. So they need to feel that sense of safety, especially for our trauma kids, where they know that if they show these parts of self, we can also support them therapeutically to build those new skills. So why is it so powerful? Most children come to therapy with underdeveloped agency. So adults very much are the ones that speak for them. They come to the initial parent consult. They're the one that calls up and books in to see their child, books us obviously, to see their child. So they come with an understanding of relationships with others that often relates to the adults step in, the adults do for me. So every time we return responsibility, we're communicating to the child, most importantly, that you are capable, that you can decide, and that I trust that you know what you're doing. And that's so important, because children now more than ever need to develop that internal source of evaluation, that independent self-direction, self-responsibility, those human capacities that we talk about. So over time, we are working to rewire the child's sense of self so that they feel like they have that sense of agency. They feel like they can make those decisions. So for children who have hyper-controlled or are hyper-overwhelmed, this skill is the healing, because we're going to get them to step out of what has potentially kept them safe in fight or flight or in other circumstances, and we actually want to build that capacity in them. So what do those returning responsibility statements look like? Something that I mentioned in my training that I think is really helpful and might be something for you guys that you might want to take on board, for anyone listening who is in the space or learning in the space. We know from Landreth's classic framing in child-centered play therapy, he starts with the phrase "in here." And I think that that is very helpful because it signals that in the playroom, it's a unique space with different rules to the outside world. So we make sure that we clarify that in here, that's something you can do. So let's go through some of those statements, and you'll hear me say that in here as a way of emphasizing that, but there's obviously alternatives as well. So if you've got a child that wants you to open something, what's our immediate response? In here, that's something you can do. In here, that's something you can decide how to open it. So we want to really emphasize that while maybe outside of the playroom, they've had adults do that, in the playroom, this is what the nature of the work is, that it is actually a space where I want to return that responsibility back to you as the child to build those skills. What should I use, or which one should I use, as a question that you might get? That's something you can decide. That's a very standard statement for us in child-centered play therapy. That's something you can decide, or you've got something in mind. Those things, or those statements, are ones that you can certainly keep in your back pocket and have available ready when you need to do that returning responsibility. I can't remember if I've talked about this before, but in the very early days of my work doing child-centered play therapy, one of the things that really helped me was going through the textbook. Gary Landreth's The Art of the Relationship was the textbook I used at the time, and I would pick out some of those key phrases and really not memorize them, but have them really present, top of mind. We obviously don't take papers in and have those statements on those papers, nothing like that. It's just something that I had memorized for me, so that I felt like when I had these situations where a child was asking me questions, I had a statement that I could use back to them. So I felt like it empowered me to be able to stay true to the modality. So the statements like, that's something you can decide, in here you can open it, in here that's something you can do, they are statements that you could potentially hold in mind. Can you draw it for me? You can decide how you want it to look. So starting with you is a very important tool, obviously, in child-centered play therapy as well, because we put the child in the center of the focus of the reflections. Am I doing it right is another great one. Seeking that feedback. And so you can say, in here, there's no right or wrong. You get to decide. You can decide how you think that picture's going. So I really want you guys to practice that if that's something that you are struggling with at the moment, using some of those phrases. So why do we as professionals, I hinted at it a little bit before, but why do we struggle a little bit in the beginning, especially when we're learning? So our instinct as caring professionals is to help, which I kind of mentioned before. We get into this profession to support children. So we want to, in our instincts, answer for them. If they're asking us questions, our default, position is always to answer that question. And that's really the difference in child-centered play therapy, right? Is that we don't have to have the answers, nor is it a requirement for us to have the answers. So it's so important that we are putting the child in the lead and we're putting them at the center of our focus, as I said. And so we want the child to have that experience, not so much around what we're answering. One of the things that I also play, devil's advocate in this space of too, is the fact that if we were to answer some of those questions, and I think Gary Landreth talks about this in the textbook as well, if we are to talk about, if we're to answer those questions, that there is a risk that what we are giving as an answer is not what the child is expecting. And so then there's a potential for us to potentially impact that therapeutic alliance, that therapeutic relationship, where the child either feels like, oh, they didn't answer the way I thought, maybe I'm, not good enough, the things that I was thinking about wasn't the same as the therapist's, and so it can impact their self-esteem, self-worth, but also then that congruence and that connection. So the therapist doesn't get me, that they didn't answer the way that I thought they would, and it starts to kind of impact more at a macro level, that relationship, that therapeutic alliance. So I'm very mindful of not wanting to answer those questions, but also too, I always emphasize, I want to make sure that I am staying true to our framework around facilitating a socially acceptable relationship. So I want to make sure that I am working to empower the child rather than them depend on me for all of the answers. Big distinction there. So returning responsibility feels at first like we're kind of withholding that help. We're not necessarily doing as the caring professionals what we thought we would do, but it's actually the opposite, is what I would argue. So doing for the child what they can do for themselves is actually withholding. So this is something that then becomes part of our extension in parent consultations. So if you are working with families, or in particular parents or caregivers who are more of that helicopter parent who wants to jump in and fix and help, and we are working with a population of parents at the moment who are really trying to reparent themselves whilst also reparenting their children, and so they are often exhausted themselves. I talk very regularly in the training that I provide around this idea that we know that this population of parents at the moment, we have in our communities oftentimes both parents working, needing to work to be able to financially be able to survive, and so oftentimes they are trying to run a household and work and parent, and it's exhausting, and it is very much that our population of parents are overscheduled, overstimulated, struggling to find that free time, which is like how I started this conversation talking about how I'm trying to find a work-life balance. For us geriatric millennials in the trenches of parenting, I'm not sure that lives anywhere near where I know to be. So I am definitely working on that myself. And so we know that then when parents are time for themselves, being able to return responsibility to facilitate that growth and self-direction and skill development for their child isn't always possible because of the constraints of the day and the schedule and the time. So it is something that I am keen to share with my parents as a beginning tool for how they can support their child, because it is something that if we can start doing that parallel work at home alongside the work we're doing in the playroom, we're going to have even better outcomes. So this is something that I would recommend for anyone who is maybe struggling with your parent consultations, to offer this particular skill as your strategy. I'm always about not reinventing the wheel, and so whenever I'm having my parent consults, and I think I've talked about this before, but I'm very much wanting to relate to what I'm doing in the playroom in terms of the skills that I'm using to be able to then teach those skills to the parent, because Gary Landreth always talks about how the skills should not just live in the playroom. And so that focus on our parent consults is really important. So we don't want to withhold that opportunity for them to have that sense of agency and build those skills around independence and self-direction and self-responsibility. So this is why it will feel uncomfortable for us if we feel like we're withholding that support by returning responsibility. I hope I'm making a good argument here to suggest that it's actually really helpful. We're actually doing the opposite, and requires us to sit a little bit in that uncomfortable. So what are some of the mistakes that we might make as child-centered play therapists when it comes to returning responsibility? So area for growth number 1, refusing to help with genuinely age inappropriate tasks. So returning responsibility requires us to be aware of child development theory here a little bit. So we're not going to ask a 2-year-old who is struggling to open a can of Play-Doh to keep trying because they may not actually have the gross or fine motor skills to do it. So it's very important that when we are returning responsibility and considering returning responsibility in our therapy sessions, we're assessing, is this actually something that the child can do for themselves? So if it is, then we're in good stead to put that returning responsibility statement out there. If it isn't, and it is something that child might struggle with, that's an opportunity where we can support and assist. So making sure that we are doing it in an age-appropriate lens. Also, in terms of our affect, and we know that our tenets of CCPT are congruence, empathy, and unconditional positive regard, and that lives everywhere in our reflections. So we also need to make sure that when we're returning responsibility, we're doing it in a gentle and warm and supportive way, whilst also technically kind of holding boundaries as well. So we don't want to be doing it too rigidly. The in here you can decide needs to come with that warmth and care. So we can't necessarily say it really flatly or kind of transactionally, if you like. It certainly comes from a place of empathy when we're responding. Overusing it can be another mistake. So sometimes children actually need help. So if they actually genuinely need our physical help, we need to help them do it. So returning responsibilities for those decisions and choices, not those tasks, as I was saying earlier, that might actually require assistance. And our last kind of area to be mindful of is actually missing when the child is genuinely distressed. So there is definitely a nuance there when we are returning responsibility, that if we can see that the child is becoming more and more dysregulated, that we are using our clinical judgment around continuing those returning responsibilities or going more deeper to those making meaning statements or reflecting feelings, and helping with that co-regulation. So there is a bit of a balance there. We certainly want children to try for themselves and we want to give them the opportunity to try for themselves, but if they are very dysregulated or becoming more and more dysregulated and asking for help, that's a co-regulation moment, as I said, not a returning responsibility. So it's very important when we're looking at, I guess, the purpose of this skill is returning responsibility is how we hand the child back to themselves. So this is absolutely an incredibly important part of our connection and the tools that we work with in child-centered play therapy to build those human capacities. We often talk about, say, in the disability space, how we can actually quantify, I guess, the development of the skills, for lack of a better term, in the work that we're doing when it's non-directive and child-focused. This is one of those skills that actually helps with those tangible outcomes around helping to build a child's self-esteem, self-worth, self-confidence. We are going to do esteem building statements next. So that will be our next skill that we'll talk about in the podcast next week, because I want to cover that as a building on of this skill around returning responsibility. Oftentimes when you're learning about it, returning responsibility and esteem building statements kind of live hand in hand in your learning journeys. So that is really, I guess, a snapshot of returning responsibility. Like I said, generally practitioners find that returning responsibility as not too bad, or something that they can apply fairly consistently as they start their journey. But I hope that this has been helpful in just giving you some food for thought and pointers on your practice to kind of make sure that we're maintaining that CCPT fidelity with this particular skill of returning responsibility. So like I said, next week I'm going to do esteem building. Then after that, I want to do an episode on limit setting and making meaning statements or empathetic responding. So we have some really good episodes coming up, you guys. So this has been a really short and sweet episode because I know that this is a skill that, is something easy to tackle and to talk about. So I hope you all have a lovely rest of your week. Go well, look after yourself and each other. That is so, so important. Please look after yourselves and each other and take care. And I will see you the same time next week for our next episode on the podcast. Have a great day. Thank you so much for being here for another episode of the Play Therapy Circle. If anything resonated with you today, I'd love it if you could follow the podcast, share it with a colleague, or leave a short review. It really helps others find our circle. And if you have a topic or question you'd love me to explore, I'd love to hear from you. This space is for you, and I want it to feel like a conversation. Until next time, take care of yourself, and remember, you belong here.